According to legend, Rome began with two discarded infants. Romulus and Remus survived in the wild only because they were nursed by a she-wolf. As adults, the twins decided to build their own settlement, but they couldn't agree on which hill to claim. When Romulus started constructing a small perimeter wall, Remus mocked him by jumping over it. Romulus responded by killing his brother on the spot. Now the sole king of an empty settlement, Romulus needed citizens. He declared his new territory an asylum city, throwing the doors open to runaway slaves, debtors, and exiled criminals. Rome was not born from a noble bloodline or a divine mandate. It was built by outcasts who understood that survival required a willingness to use extreme violence and discard the old rules. This crude settlement cycled through 7 kings over its early history. But when the 7th king proved to be a cruel tyrant, the population revolted, expelled him, and made a strict vow: no single man would ever hold absolute power in Rome again. This diagram illustrates the system they designed to replace the monarchy. Executive power was split between 2 elected consuls who ruled simultaneously and could veto each other, while a much larger body of elite citizens, the Senate, provided strict oversight. They called it a republic. But this new government was immediately tested by a devastating military failure. Tribes from the ancient Gaul region marched south, overwhelmed the defending legions, and completely sacked and burned the city, leaving only after the Romans paid a massive ransom in gold. That specific trauma instilled a deep cultural paranoia. To ensure they would never be humiliated like that again, the Republic transformed into a highly aggressive military state, operating on the belief that the only way to be safe was to conquer every neighbor before they could become a threat. Rome's defensive conquests soon snowballed into massive expansion campaigns across the Mediterranean. This peaked when they faced their only true rival, Carthage. The Romans defeated the Carthaginians, enslaved the surviving population, and leveled the city entirely. With Carthage removed, Rome systematically absorbed Spain, Greece, North Africa, and eventually Gaul. The Republic extracted unimaginable wealth, resources, and enslaved people from these territories, enriching the capital far beyond its original means. These endless campaigns broke the Republic. Soldiers began fighting in decades-long deployments. Because the state was slow to pay them, troops relied directly on their generals for salaries. Thousands of veterans were now loyal only to the men who paid them, not the Senate. By conquering the Mediterranean to secure its borders, Rome created massive, privately loyal armies, effectively building the weapon that would dismantle its government. Julius Caesar was the ultimate product of this environment. He used a multi-year campaign in Gaul to build an intensely loyal military force, amassing a terrifying level of personal leverage. When the Senate ordered him to surrender his command, Caesar refused. He marched his veteran legions directly into Rome, drove out his political rivals, and systematically absorbed every major political office, declaring himself dictator for life. Desperate to uphold the ancient vow against kings, a faction of senators surrounded Caesar during a meeting and stabbed him to death. The senators believed they were saving the state, but Caesar was popular with the public and the military. By executing him without a plan to manage the fallout, the Senate triggered a brutal civil war that permanently destroyed the republic they were trying to protect. Out of that chaos emerged Caesar's adopted heir, Augustus. Defeating his final rivals, he absorbed total control, officially establishing the Roman Empire. Augustus recognized exactly why the previous system failed. He restructured the military into a permanent standing force, where soldiers received standardized pay, equipment, and land grants directly from the imperial treasury, severing their reliance on individual generals. He also realized that infinite expansion was a liability. In 9 AD, Germanic tribes ambushed and slaughtered 3 entire Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest. Instead of retaliating with endless wars of conquest, Augustus used the disaster to halt expansion and establish hard, heavily fortified borders along the Rhine and Danube rivers. The Roman people surrendered the political participation of the Republic. In exchange, Augustus gave them predictability. For centuries, this system maintained the Pax Romana, relying on strict administration and massive stone infrastructure to keep the known world stable. Over the next few centuries, the quality of leadership declined. Emperors became increasingly insulated from the provinces, displaying deep paranoia and incompetence while draining the treasury for personal vanity. As the emperors lost their grip, true authority shifted to the Praetorian Guard. Originally formed as an elite protective unit, these soldiers realized they controlled access to the throne. They began assassinating emperors they disliked, and in one instance, literally auctioned the title to the highest bidder. The system was buckling. Rampant inflation devalued the currency, plagues devastated the workforce, and the sheer geographic size of the empire made it impossible to manage from a single, deeply corrupt city in Italy. The administration eventually recognized the crisis and made a radical adjustment. They divided the empire into administrative halves and moved the primary capital east to Constantinople, a wealthy, easily defensible city situated on highly profitable trade routes. This administrative split saved the east, but it doomed the west. The Latin-speaking half of the empire was left politically hollow, cut off from rich tax bases and entirely dependent on paying Germanic mercenary armies to defend borders it could no longer afford to staff itself. The fragile western half was then hit by an external shock it couldn't absorb. Nomadic warriors known as the Huns swept out of the Eurasian steppe, driving tens of thousands of desperate Goths directly into Roman territory seeking asylum. Rome allowed them to cross the border, but corrupt provincial officials immediately began starving and extorting the refugees. Driven to the brink, the massive migrant population violently revolted, turning on the Roman military and killing the emperor on the battlefield. The psychological barrier of Roman invincibility was gone. Over the next several decades, various armed groups marched freely through Italy, repeatedly sacking the city of Rome itself. The formal end was surprisingly quiet. In 476 AD, a Germanic military commander calmly walked into the palace and told the final Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, to step down. There was no grand final battle. The Western administration simply ceased to exist. Rome's early trauma forged a culture obsessed with achieving security through total dominance. That aggressive drive built the most extensive infrastructure the ancient world had ever seen. But by relying entirely on massive military forces to hold an impossibly large territory together, Rome engineered the exact mechanism that